So this is a culture that's beginning to, as it were, tell people who they are. So Sartre, the existentialist, wouldn't have been happy with this development. And the paradox into which he found himself drawn was twofold. On the one hand, you get enough nonconformists, and then you've just got another group to which you advertise, okay? That's one problem. The second problem, he points out himself as he matures. He writes an autobiography called The Words. And he said, you know, when I was talking about death and despair and anxiety, when I wrote all that stuff about nausea and whatever, in fact, he's referring specifically to writing nausea. He says, I was a young man, and actually I was fake and hoodwinked to the bottom of my soul. Because while I was writing that book, I was, on the one hand, I, myself, Sartre, the writer, the chronicler of hell, I was, in fact, extremely happy. This was sort of bad news for people who loved existentialism. That later on in life, he says, this was the happiest period of my life when I was writing nausea, ooh, death, meaninglessness. And I'm not unaware of that irony in the explication of the material either, because I get a real kick out of this stuff. I enjoy it. I mean, you know, I don't enjoy it as much as Jimmy Swaggart enjoys what he does, but then I don't have the same array of behaviors that he has. In any case, Sartre's mature view was that the road to freedom would lead through an encounter and a construction of selves with other selves. And the only project available, that at least that he thought, on a scale grand enough to be a worthwhile project, and I mean he believed this to the end of his days, as far as I know, was the project of being a revolutionary, which he was. In short, while he didn't view it as a way to stop working on his self-freedom, that his existence preceded his essence, that he would make his existence by choices, that was not inconsistent for Sartre with making one of those choices, or the main choice for his project, the choice of being a revolutionary. And that just meant at that period in Europe to be a Marxist of one kind or another. No one ever figured out the kind of Marxist Sartre was. I mean, I have a book here by him called Search for a Method, which is just what it says it is. He's trying to figure out a reason to be what he has already decided to be. I'm not putting him down for that, because that is, and this is another part of my polemic as the course goes on against analytic philosophy and standard philosophy. Part of their modus operandi is always to have already what you want to prove in mind, and then clearly, after the fact, produce the evidence. It's like lawyering. Doing philosophy at universities like Duke and Harvard is like lawyering. You know what the hell you think. Now, and then afterwards you construct the arguments. And I mean, no good philosopher or good physicist would let one little dirty fact get in the way. I mean, that's true of physicists too. Don't think it's just true of philosophers. If you look at a cloud chamber and see just one little particle astray, you just forget it. Hell, I don't know what that is. And then you go back to the formulas. By the way, that's not a put-down. You'd be crazy to do science any other way. In the case of philosophers, there's not even cloud chambers there, though, so one wonders what kind of drugs they take. But anyway, that's another story. I'm trying to give a substantive talk on Sartre here. It's not working out. Because the reason it's not working out, because his work is immense. There's tons of it. And he's more important as a figure. I want you to understand that, to me, he's more important as a personality of thought. He, in a way, engages in at least the experiences of 3 generations in trying to create an authentic, worthy self. The Second World War generation, where he's a freedom fighter against the Nazis. That's part of his existential identity, comes out of the hideous experience of the Europeans during the Second World War. Certainly existentialism comes out of that. The project of Reconstruction, part of what comes out of that is this commitment to revolutionary Marxism as he understood it and as he understands it. And that's even a more difficult matter, since for Sartre it would be more like what I think we understand in this country as a sort of populism of a certain kind. I mean, it's not what we, it's not like a great love for the commissar or whatever. It comes out of a kind of populist spirit in Sartre. Now, where does that come from? Well, it comes from what he said, as I mentioned earlier. I was mentioning his autobiography, The Words. It comes out of this insight that, when he was young, talking about death and all that, he was a fake, he was hoodwink, and he's come to see that he's no better than anybody else. And that insight, I'm no better than any, that insight leads him on to the insight that perhaps that's the condition that's been historically missing, the condition that that societies remain in today, and that's one of rigid hierarchies. And I think that those rigid hierarchies remain intact in spite of the complexity of modern societies, sometimes in absolute opposition to it. And I'm not sure that Sartre had that full insight, but he had it at least in part. And the fact that Sartre's journey through a variant of Marxism, a kind of Marxism, did not produce for him the results that many people expected from Marxism is not a story to be chortled about, because what was Marxism except a secular way to try to recover the lost meanings from a previous sacred period? I mean, it still has this advantage over so-called liberal democratic societies that revolutionary socialists believe something. It could be misguided, but they believe some damn thing, which allows you to predict to some extent what they'll do. This is not an advantage if you take our political system, where it's awfully hard, as many of us have discovered through long years, to predict what any of our leaders, politicians will do, based either on what they say, and the question about whether they believe anything at all is, of course, relevant, obviously relevant. So, I mean, that is the advantage of someone who believes something. And Sartre was an opinionated person about everything, but he was, in the same way, predictable.